Chicago, a city of 2.7 million souls, where Lake Michigan winds cut through steel skyscrapers like invisible blades. October 2019, the kind of autumn afternoon where the sky turns the color of bruised metal and rain doesn't fall, it attacks. At the corner of Madison and State Street, where the chaos of downtown Chicago pulses with relentless energy, a young woman named Lena Costa stood motionless. 22 years old, blind since birth. Yet in a city that moves too fast to notice anyone, Lena had mastered something most sighted people never would. She had learned to listen to the world. Her white cane tapped against the wet concrete in a steady rhythm. Tap, 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 the sound of her own anchor. Around her the city screamed. Car horns, shouting vendors, the metallic screech of the L train 3 blocks away. The rain hammered against the pavement like 1,000 impatient fingers demanding entry. Lena wore a navy blue coat, worn at the cuffs, the kind you inherit from thrift stores because that's what your budget allows when you're working part-time at a non-profit and taking night classes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, already damp from the rain. On her face, a face that had learned to communicate through every micro-expression because words alone were never enough, there was a particular kind of patience. Not the patience of someone waiting, the patience of someone who had learned long ago that the world operates on its own schedule, and fighting it only exhausted you. She was waiting to cross. The pedestrian signal chirped, an electronic bird singing its 3-second song. Go, go, go! Lena stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had crossed this intersection 47 times before. She counted steps. She listened for engines. She felt the vibration of the city through her feet, but something was different today. 3 steps into the crosswalk, she felt it. A disturbance in the air beside her, not a person pushing past, not a cyclist, something heavier, a presence. She could sense it the way animals sense a storm before it arrives. A man. He was standing frozen in the middle of the intersection. Through her cane's vibration against the wet pavement, through the sound of his breathing, sharp, irregular, afraid, Lena understood immediately. He was lost. Not geographically lost, something deeper. The kind of loss that happens when your entire world collapses in a single moment. The rain intensified. Somewhere, a car horn blared. The pedestrian signal's chirp faded. Lena did what Lena always did. She reached out her hand. Dante Morello was 41 years old, and he had spent the last 20 years learning to move through the world like a weapon, precise, controlled, devastating. He owned 3 nightclubs in the West Loop. He had investments in construction companies, restaurants, private security firms. To anyone who knew where to look, he was Chicago's most dangerous man. To everyone else, he was simply another expensive suit in a city full of them. That morning, sitting in his penthouse office above a club called Nero's, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River, Dante had given an order, just words, casual, the way you might order coffee. But words, for men like Dante Morello, were currency. They moved money, they moved violence, they moved death. By afternoon, those same words had come back to find him. A rival organization, the Castellano family, based out of Cicero, had interpreted the order as a declaration of war, which it was. But war in the world Dante inhabited moved fast. By 3 p.m., his personal security detail had warned him. They had intercepted communications. There was a hit being organized, not a threat, not a warning, a hit, a contract, the kind you don't survive. So Dante did something he hadn't done in 2 decades. He ran. He left his office through a service entrance. He ditched his driver. He moved through the city like a man trying to shed his own skin. The rain was good. It covered movement. It confused surveillance. It made the city anonymous again, which was all he wanted now. To be nobody, to disappear, but you cannot outrun yourself. At Madison and State, waiting for the light to change, Dante Morello stood in the pouring rain with his hands shaking. Not from cold, from something he couldn't name. Fear. He had tasted fear before. Adrenaline. He had learned to metabolize that into power. This was different. This was the moment when a man realizes that everything he has built, every choice he has made, every line he has crossed, none of it matters. Because today, in the rain, in the middle of the city he owns and controls, he is prey. The pedestrian signal chirped. He stepped into the crosswalk without thinking, his mind 3 steps ahead, calculating routes, safe houses, people he could trust. Were there any? Money he could access. He had $80,000 in cash in a safety deposit box on Dearborn. He wasn't paying attention. He was never not paying attention, and that lapse, that single moment of distraction, was exactly the kind that got men killed. A car approached from his left. The driver saw him too late or didn't see him at all. The engine's sound changed, accelerating deliberately. This was not an accident. This was the hit. This was it. Time compressed. Dante heard the engine roar. He heard the hiss of tires on wet pavement. He heard a hand, gentle but absolutely certain, grabbed his arm and pulled him backward with surprising strength. For a man who had spent 20 years learning not to be touched, not to trust anyone's hands, it was a moment of absolute surrender. He stumbled. The car passed so close he felt the heat from its engine, the displacement of air. The car didn't stop. It accelerated into traffic and disappeared. Dante was on his knees in the rain, gasping, alive, and the person kneeling beside him was a young woman with eyes that looked at nothing, because they couldn't see anything, and yet seemed to see everything. "Are you hurt?" Lena asked, her voice steady, calm, untouched by the violence that had just passed between them. Dante couldn't speak. He was trying to understand what had happened, who this woman was, why she had saved him. "You froze," Lena continued, her hand still on his arm. "In the middle of the intersection. I could feel it. You were afraid." "How did you—" Dante started, but his voice cracked. "I'm blind," Lena said simply. "Not stupid. Come on. We need to get out of the rain. You're shaking." She helped him to his feet. And without question, without understanding what he was, or who he was, or what darkness lived inside him, Lena Costa guided Dante Morello across the street, to safety, to shelter, to a moment of peace he would never forget. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss when we reveal how far would you go for someone you just met. The diner was called Rosie's, located on a corner of Pilsen, where the neighborhood still held onto its immigrant roots. Murals of famous Mexican artists covered the walls, and the smell of chilaquiles and fresh tortillas created a permanent fog of comfort inside. Lena brought Dante here because Rosie's was where she came when she needed to think. The owner, a woman named Rosario who had known Lena since she was 16, always kept a corner booth for her. Quiet, away from the main traffic, a place where someone could sit and exist without being noticed, which was exactly what a man like Dante Morello needed. "The usual?" Rosario asked, appearing at the booth with a warmth that came from genuine affection. "Actually," Lena said, turning slightly toward Dante, "what would you like? My treat." Dante Morello, sitting across from this blind girl in a worn navy coat, realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him something without wanting something in return. He ordered coffee, black. Lena ordered the same. For several minutes they sat in silence. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, the diner hummed with the evening crowd. Construction workers, nurses coming off shift, teenagers doing homework in the booths. Life. Ordinary, unaware of the fact that one of Chicago's most dangerous men was sitting in the corner, waiting to see if he was still being hunted. "What's your name?" Lena asked finally. He could have lied. He should have lied. But something about this woman, something about the fact that she couldn't see his face, couldn't see the ugliness he wore like armor, couldn't see the man he had become, made him tell the truth. "Dante." "Just Dante?" "Just Dante," he confirmed. Lena smiled slightly. "I'm Lena, and before you ask why I helped you, I didn't do it because I knew you. I did it because you were afraid. And being blind, I understand fear. I understand thinking the world is dangerous, that you're vulnerable, that at any moment something can go wrong." She lifted her coffee to her lips, and Dante found himself watching her with an intensity that surprised him. She was ordinary in every measurable way, not beautiful in the way he was accustomed to, expensive, sculpted, transactional. She was something else, real, present, untouched by the machinery of the world he inhabited. "Where do you live?" he asked carefully. "West Village. Small apartment. I work at a non-profit that helps people with visual impairments transition into independent living. I'm studying social work at night. My life is very quiet," Lena said. "What about you? Where do you live, Dante?" Another moment where he could have lied. He almost did. "I have a few places," he said instead. "Nothing permanent." Lena seemed to accept this without question. That must be lonely. The word struck him with unexpected force. Lonely. Yes. After 20 years of power, after surrounding himself with people who feared him, after building an empire of control and violence, he was absolutely, completely lonely. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said. "That car, was it trying to hit you? Or was I just imagining things?" Dante finished. "I was going to say being paranoid, but yes, that too." He couldn't lie to her. Not to this woman who had just saved his life. "Yes," he said quietly, "it was trying to hit me." Lena was silent for a long moment. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what he had done to deserve it. She simply reached across the table and placed her hand on his. Not sexual, not romantic, just human contact from one frightened person to another. "Then you need a place to stay," she said. "Somewhere safe." "Lena, I have a couch," she interrupted. "You look like you haven't slept in days. And I have a feeling that whatever is happening to you, you're running from people who know where you usually go. So you need somewhere unexpected." It was insane. It was the kind of decision that got people killed. It was also, Dante realized, the only moment of genuine kindness anyone had offered him in so long that he couldn't calculate how long. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Because," Lena said simply, "someone did it for me once. When I was 17, I had an accident. The doctor said I might regain partial sight. I didn't. I had a complete breakdown. I thought my life was over. I was living in my parents' house, refusing to leave, convinced I was broken. And then a woman from this non-profit came to visit. She was blind too. She sat with me for 3 hours without trying to fix anything, without offering platitudes. She just sat there and said, 'Your life isn't over. It's just different now.' And eventually I believed her." She paused. "So now I try to do that for other people, in whatever way I can." Dante Morello spent the next 4 days on Lena's couch in her small West Village apartment. The apartment was a study in the architecture of a blind woman's life. Everything had a place. The kitchen was organized with methodical precision. Spices labeled in braille, knives with colored tape on the handles to distinguish them, a small cutting board marked with guides. Books lined the shelves, hundreds of them, many in braille, others with audiobook codes. The living room was sparse, a comfortable couch, a chair, a bookshelf, a window facing the street where Lena would sit and listen to the world outside. During those 4 days, Dante learned things about peace that 20 years of power had never taught him. Lena worked from home 2 days that week, doing administrative work for her non-profit. She made coffee in the morning. She prepared lunch in the afternoon. She moved through the apartment with a grace that made Dante realize how much of disability is not about what's missing, but about the intelligence and adaptation the human body develops to compensate. He watched her, carefully, obsessively, trying to understand what she was. She was incapable of fear. Or rather, she experienced fear differently. She didn't fear being seen, being judged, being found out. Her fears were practical. She worried about bumping into things, about crossing streets in heavy traffic, about independence slipping away. The things he feared, exposure, betrayal, Death at the hands of rivals seemed to not even exist in her universe. On the third night, Dante made a call to a person he trusted, which meant he called the one person in his life he could still trust, a man named Victor, who had been with him since the beginning, who understood the business, understood the risks, understood that loyalty, in Dante's world, was the rarest currency. "Where the hell are you?" Victor demanded. "The Castellanos are looking everywhere. We've got people watching your properties, your old safe houses. They're serious about this, Dante. You need to move. You need to disappear. Or you need to fight back." "Neither," Dante said quietly, watching Lena in the kitchen, making tea with a precision that suggested she had done it 10,000 times before. "I need you to find out everything you can about a truce. I need you to reach out to Castellano. Tell him we're willing to negotiate." "What?" Victor's voice cracked with disbelief. "Dante, that's not how this works. You made a move. They're responding. We respond back. This is chess at a high level. You don't just say, 'Let's negotiate.'" "Find a way," Dante said. "I'll call you back tomorrow." He hung up before Victor could protest further. Lena appeared in the doorway to the living room, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, not prying, just curious. "Someone from my work," Dante said. "Your work sounds complicated," Lena observed, handing him a mug and sitting down beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "It is," he admitted. "I used to think my life was more complicated before I went blind," Lena said. "I thought losing my vision meant losing everything. But actually, it made things simpler. Because you can't worry about things you can't see. You have to focus on what you can actually touch, what you can actually hear, what you can actually know." She sipped her tea. "I think sometimes we make our lives more complicated than they need to be. We see problems everywhere, and we forget that sometimes the simplest solution is just to be honest, to be real, to ask for help." Dante understood in that moment that she was not talking about abstract philosophy. She was talking about him. She was offering him, in her quiet way, the option to become someone different. He didn't know if it was possible, but for the first time in 20 years, he wanted to know. By the 5th day, the world found them. It started with a knock on the door, gentle, professional, the kind of knock that police use when they're trying not to frighten anyone, which means they're probably going to frighten everyone anyway. Lena was in the kitchen. Dante was on the couch, pretending to read a newspaper he couldn't actually focus on. He heard the knock, and his entire body went rigid. The old instincts activated immediately. His hand moved toward the knife block in the kitchen. His mind calculated exits, contingencies, responses. "I'll get it," Lena said, moving toward the door before he could stop her. "Wait," Dante started, but he was too slow. Lena opened the door to find 2 detectives standing in the hallway. One was a woman in her 50s, with the exhausted face of someone who has seen too much. The other was a man, younger, with the careful posture of someone trained in observation. "Lena Costa?" the woman asked. "Yes," Lena confirmed. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen. This is Detective Marcus Williams. May we come in? We'd like to ask you some questions about an incident on Madison and State Street last Tuesday afternoon." Dante's heart stopped. They knew. They somehow knew that Lena had been there. And if they knew that, if they were here asking questions, the entire network he had built, the power he had accumulated, the protection he thought he had, it was all compromised. Lena stepped aside, inviting them in with the politeness of someone who had been taught that you don't refuse police, that you cooperate, that you're honest, because honesty is the right thing to do. "Of course," she said. "Please, sit down." Detective Chen's eyes found Dante almost immediately. "And you are?" "A friend," Lena said before Dante could respond. "He's staying with me for a few days." "What's your name?" Chen asked, her tone shifting, becoming more official, more dangerous. Dante could have lied. He could have given a false name. But he was tired. Tired of lying. Tired of running. And this woman, This blind girl who had saved his life because she understood fear and loneliness in a way he had never understood them, was about to be destroyed by proximity to him. He could see it happening already, in Detective Chen's calculating expression, in the slight note of suspicion in her voice. "Dante Morello," he said quietly. The color drained from Detective Williams's face. Chen's expression didn't change, but Dante could see her processing. This man wanted in connection to organized crime activities, organized fraud, 3 unsolved murders. He was sitting in this apartment in front of her. "Mr. Morello," Chen said carefully, "I think we need to have a longer conversation, but first I'd like to speak with Ms. Costa alone for a moment. Is that all right with you both?" Dante and Lena exchanged a glance, her blind eyes finding his with an accuracy that made him wonder, not for the first time, whether blindness was simply another name for seeing the things that sighted people missed. "Of course," Lena said. Detective Williams walked Dante into the bedroom. The conversation was quick, professional, and absolute. They had a warrant for his arrest related to organized crime activities. However, they were more interested in information. The Castellano family had begun cooperating with federal authorities, providing documentation of Dante's operations in exchange for immunity. The case against him was not circumstantial. It was comprehensive and devastating. Dante could fight it, Williams explained. He could hire attorneys, go through trials, maintain the pretense that he was innocent, or he could cooperate. He could provide information about his operations, about the network, about the other men involved. In exchange, the charges would be significantly reduced. He would still go to prison, but it would be 5 years instead of 25. It was, in the calculus of criminal justice, mercy. In the living room, Detective Chen was asking Lena different questions. "How long have you known Mr. Morello?" Chen asked. 5 days, Lena said. "Since Tuesday. I helped him cross the street. He was in danger." "Did he tell you what kind of danger?" "No," Lena said, "but I didn't need him to. I could feel it." Chen leaned forward. "Miss Costa, the man you're harboring is involved in serious criminal activities. He's connected to the deaths of at least 3 people. He's involved in loan sharking, extortion, organized gambling operations. Do you understand that by allowing him to stay here, you could be prosecuted as an accessory?" Lena was quiet for a long moment. "I understand," she said finally. "But I also understand that people are not just the worst things they do. And I understood that he was afraid. Fear does something to people. It makes them smaller. Dante is not small. He's not evil. He's just trapped." "Lena," Chen said, and her voice had lost some of its hardness, "sometimes people who seem good are actually dangerous. Sometimes we see what we want to see in people, not what's actually there." "That's true," Lena agreed, "but sometimes people are good. Sometimes compassion is actually the intelligent response, not the naive one. I can't see Dante's face. I can't see whether he looks dangerous. All I can do is listen to the sound of his breathing, the cadence of his voice, the things he does when he thinks no one is watching. And from all of that, from my actual senses, not from prejudgment or bias, I can tell you that he is a person capable of change." Chen had been a detective for 27 years. She had learned that people were rarely capable of the changes they hoped for. But she had also learned that the world was more complex than evidence suggested, that human beings contained multitudes, and that sometimes mercy was not the opposite of justice. It was a prerequisite for it. "I'm going to give you a choice," Chen said. "You can let him turn himself in voluntarily. That demonstrates cooperation with law enforcement, and it will help his case considerably. Or he can resist and we'll arrest him today. But either way, he's going to prison, Lena. That's non-negotiable." Dante emerged from the bedroom to find Lena standing at the window, her face turned toward the street, toward the life happening beyond the glass she couldn't see, but somehow always seemed to understand. "They're right," she said without turning around. "I know they are." You've done things, bad things, things that hurt people. Yes, Dante admitted, and you're going to go to prison. Yes, he said again. Lena turned toward him, and even though her eyes were blind, they seemed to see everything. But you're also going to come out of prison different than you went in, because you learned something here, in this apartment, in this last week. You learned that it's possible to exist in the world without violence, without control, without power. You learned that the simplest things, sitting with someone, listening, being honest, those are what actually matter. She moved toward him and placed her hand over his heart. There's someone in there underneath everything else, someone who is capable of kindness. And that someone is real, Dante, as real as the darkness. And that means you get to choose who you become next. Detective Chen appeared in the doorway. "We're ready whenever you are, Mr. Morello," she said. Dante Morello placed his hand on top of Lena's hand over his heart and nodded. "I want to turn myself in," he said. "Voluntarily, I want to cooperate with the investigation. I want to provide full testimony regarding my operations and the operations of others in the network." As he was led out of the apartment in handcuffs, as the camera flashes appeared outside the building, as his life collapsed and reformed into something entirely different, Dante Morello turned back to look at Lena one final time. She was standing in the doorway of her apartment, her blind eyes finding his one last time. And he understood in that moment that she had saved him twice. Once from the car and once from himself. 3 years and 2 months later. Federal Correctional Institution, Terre Haute, Indiana. A place designed by architects whose sole purpose was to remove the possibility of beauty. Concrete. Steel. Fluorescent lights that erased shadows and with them privacy. 5,000 men in a facility built for 3,000, moving through hallways in calculated patterns, each one serving sentences for what they had done or what they claimed they hadn't done. Dante Morello was in Block D, Cell 247, assigned to prison education programs. Ironic, given that he was teaching a GED class to men half his age, most of whom had never finished high school. It was work assigned to inmates with good behavior, which meant Dante had been exceptionally quiet. No fights, no contraband, no attempts to maintain his network from the inside. He had done what he said he would do. He had cooperated fully. He had provided testimony that resulted in 9 arrests. He had watched his entire empire dismantle from a cell with a window that faced a brick wall. And every day he thought about a blind woman in a small apartment in West Village and the 5 days that had changed everything. The letters started arriving 6 months into his sentence. The first one came from Lena, no return address, just her handwriting, clear, precise, careful. She wrote about her work, about the client she was helping, about a particular case where a young man who had lost his vision in an accident was finally learning to navigate the world again. She wrote about the weather, about the seasons changing, about ordinary life continuing without him. At the end of the letter she wrote, "I forgive you, not because what you did was forgivable, but because holding on to anger only poisons the person holding it. I don't know if you did the right thing by turning yourself in, but I know you chose it. That matters." He received 7 letters from her over 3 years. One every 4 or 5 months. She never wrote about missing him or about romantic love. She wrote about faith, not in the religious sense, but in something broader. The faith that people could change, that circumstances did not define destiny, that even from a concrete cell, a man could choose to become someone different. The letters were the only things Dante owned that he kept with him always. On the day of his release, standing in the processing office with his belongings in a plastic bag and a bus ticket to Chicago in his hand, Dante Morello realized he had no idea who he was supposed to be. For 44 years, he had known. For the first 21, he was the son of a construction worker who had dreams of legitimate success. Then at 21, he had made a choice. He had met Victor, had been introduced to the network, had stepped across a line. For the next 20 years, he knew exactly who he was. a man who moved violence, who controlled territory, who was feared and respected and isolated. Then he was a man in federal prison who taught other men to read, who attended counseling, they were mandatory, who learned to sit with silence and not run from it. Now, walking out of the prison gates into the pale February sunlight of Indianapolis, he had no occupation, no identity, no role. He was simply a man, just Dante, like he had told her that afternoon in Rosie's diner. The letter arrived 2 days after his release. He was staying at a YMCA in a small room that cost $47 a night, in a city he didn't know, in a life that hadn't yet acquired shape. He almost didn't open it, thinking it was junk mail, until he saw his name written on the envelope in the same precise handwriting he had been receiving for 3 years. Dante, I don't know if you're going to contact me. I don't know if you want to, but I needed you to know. You have a choice now. For the first time in your adult life, you genuinely have a choice about who you're going to be. You can come back to Chicago. You can try to rebuild the network. There are people who would follow you. Victor still calls me asking if I've heard from you. You could reclaim what you lost, or you can choose something different. I'm starting a new non-profit organization. It's specifically designed to help men leaving incarceration transition back into society. We have housing programs, job training, mental health support. It's going to be small at first, but it will grow. I could use a co-founder, someone who understands what it's like to be trapped, who understands the machinery of the criminal justice system from the inside, who understands that people are not their worst choices. I don't know if you want this, but I wanted you to know it was possible. If you decide to come, there's a job waiting, and an apartment in the West Village, just like the one you stayed in. Small, quiet, a place to rest. The choice is yours, Dante. It's always been yours. Lena Dante. Morello got on a Greyhound bus heading toward Chicago. 12 hours of watching the American landscape unfold. Flat plains of Indiana, the industrial sprawl of Gary, the slow emergence of the Chicago skyline against a gray February sky. He watched people get on and off at different stops. He watched a mother comfort a crying child. He watched a veteran in a wheelchair navigate the bus with practiced precision. He watched the world, for perhaps the first time, without calculating how to control it. The address Lena had provided was for a storefront on Damen Avenue, in a neighborhood in transition. Gentrification was happening slowly here, boutique coffee shops appearing alongside older businesses that had been here for decades. Murals covered some walls, artists reclaiming space from concrete. The storefront had a large window covered with white paper from the inside. On the door, a sign, "Coming soon, New Horizons, Community Re-Entry and Support." Through the window, Dante could see someone moving inside, working, building something. He knocked. The door opened and Lena stood there, 3 years older than he remembered, but also exactly the same. She was wearing work clothes, paint on her hands, her hair pulled back. She was holding a paintbrush, and the very slight smile that meant she had already known he was there, that she had heard his footsteps on the sidewalk, that she was not surprised by his arrival. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," Dante replied. "You came," Lena observed. "I came," he confirmed. "Do you want to see what we're building?" she asked, stepping aside to let him inside. Inside the storefront, the walls were being painted a soft grey. There were plans spread across a table, office layouts, housing schematics, program structures. There was furniture beginning to arrive. There was, genuinely, the architecture of something new being constructed. "I've been working on this for 2 years, Lena explained as she led him through the space. "I got grants. We got donations. I found other people who believed that incarceration should mean transformation, not just punishment. We have housing for 12 men initially. We have job training partnerships with 3 different organizations. We have counseling services. We have community." She paused at the window, her blind eyes turned toward the street beyond. "The statistics are terrible," she continued. 2/3 of men released from incarceration reoffend within 5 years. Not because they want to, but because society doesn't give them any other choice. They get out, they can't find work, they can't find housing. The only people who will employ them are the people they used to work for. So they go back. Because at least in the criminal network, they had structure, they had purpose, they had income. She turned to face him. But what if we gave them something different? What if the first thing a man experienced getting out of prison wasn't rejection and isolation, but community? What if there were people willing to believe in him? What if someone had shown you that possibility when you first got out, not before you went in, but right when you got out? What could have been different? Dante looked at her, this remarkable woman who had given him grace when he deserved nothing, who had written letters into the void for 3 years, who had built an entire organization based on continuar, a single principle. That redemption was possible. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be legitimate. I don't know how to build something that doesn't operate on fear and control." "You'll learn," Lena said. "We'll learn together. That's what community means. We don't do it alone." She extended her hand toward him, just as she had on that rainy afternoon 3 years ago, at the intersection of Madison and State. He took it, 5 years later. New Horizons had expanded to 3 locations across Chicago. They had served 347 men. The reoffending rate among their participants was 12%, the lowest in the state. The organization had been featured in 3 documentaries. Lena had been invited to speak at Harvard and Yale about criminal justice reform and the role of community in rehabilitation. And Dante Morello, the man who had once been Chicago's most feared criminal, was now the co-founder and operations director of a non-profit dedicated to redemption. He lived in a modest apartment in West Village, 3 blocks from Lena's original place. They were not a romantic couple, though the assumption was something they both found somewhat amusing. They were something deeper. 2 people who had saved each other's lives in different ways, at different moments, and had chosen to continue saving each other by building something that mattered. Victor, Dante's former lieutenant, had initially tried to recruit him back into the network. Dante had declined. They had not spoken since. The Castellano family had largely dissolved after their leadership faced federal prosecution. The turf wars that had defined Chicago's organized crime landscape for decades had quieted, not disappeared. The criminal world never truly disappeared, but diminished. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, 5 years to the month after that first rainy intersection, Dante was sitting in the office of New Horizons when a young man came in, early 20s, scared, fresh out of Stateville Correctional Center, with nowhere to go and nothing but a belief, very fragile and new, that maybe his life could be different. Dante stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome," he said. "My name is Dante. I've been where you are, and I'm here to tell you that it's possible to change. It's possible to become someone different. It's possible to build a life that matters." The young man shook his hand, uncertain but willing. And in that moment, Dante Morello understood something fundamental, that redemption was not a destination, it was a practice. It was something you did every single day, in small acts of grace and compassion, in the choice to believe in people's potential rather than their pasts. He understood that Lena had been right all along. This is a story about 2 people. One was blind from birth, a woman who had learned to navigate a world she could not see, who had developed a form of sight that went beyond the physical. She saw vulnerability, she saw possibility, she saw the person underneath the armor. The other was a man who could see perfectly, but who was spiritually blind, who had spent 20 years looking at the world through the lens of power and control, who believed that fear was the only honest emotion, who had convinced himself that darkness was simply the nature of human existence. They met by accident at an intersection in Chicago, or perhaps it was not an accident. Perhaps the universe, in its infinite complexity, sometimes arranges for exactly the right people to meet at exactly the right moment. What is certain is this: that one act of compassion, one moment where a blind woman reached out her hand to a stranger in the rain, rippled forward through time in ways neither of them could have predicted. It changed 2 lives. It created an organization that changed 347 more. It demonstrated concretely and consistently that human beings are not fixed by their circumstances or their choices. We are always capable of becoming someone different. We are always capable of redemption. We are always capable of change. The question is not whether change is possible. The question is, are we willing to reach out our hand to someone in the darkness? Are we willing to believe in people's potential when they no longer believe in themselves? Are we willing to build communities based on grace instead of judgment? This is the story of blind faith. Not faith in God or fate, but faith in the possibility that exists within every human being. Faith that compassion is not weakness. Faith that mercy is not the opposite of justice, but its truest expression. Faith that it is never too late to choose differently. Did this story change how you think about redemption, about second chances, about the power of one moment of kindness? What moment hit you the hardest? Do you believe people can truly change? Who in your life showed you blind faith when you needed it most? If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss our stories about human resilience, redemption, and the transformative power of community. Next week, a new story, a new city, a new journey of transformation. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for following Lena and Dante's journey. Thank you for believing that people can change. Thank you for being part of this community of storytellers and dreamers. Until next time, have blind faith in the goodness of humanity. Subscribe, duel, like, share.